Children are often seen as symbols of innocence, purity, and safety. But what if that same innocence was nothing more than a mask? What if the very face you trust most is the one watching you in the dark? Imagine waking in the middle of the night, your room cold, the air heavy. At the doorway, you see the small frame of a child, their head tilted, their lips curled into a smile that doesn't belong. You whisper their name, but they do not answer. They only stand there, staring. Now picture the walls of their bedroom, covered in drawings you never saw them create, shapes with hollow eyes, families standing in fire, shadows larger than the child themselves. They say it's just imagination, but what happens when the imagination begins to whisper back? For centuries, there have been stories of children who see what we cannot, who speak with things we cannot name. Sometimes they warn us of danger, sometimes they bring it, and sometimes they are the danger. Tonight, we'll explore three true accounts, three terrifying stories where the children themselves became the source of fear. Not legends, not folklore, but testimonies told by those who swore they lived through them. What would you do if the most innocent face in your home became your worst nightmare? This is the first story.
The first story begins in a quiet neighborhood, a place where nothing seemed unusual, where families left their doors unlocked and children played outside until the sun disappeared. But for one family, their new home became the setting for nights that would never be forgotten, nights filled not with laughter, but with whispers. The daughter was only 6 years old, bright, cheerful, with a smile her parents adored. At first, she seemed like any other child. She spent her afternoons drawing, talking to her toys, humming songs in her bedroom. But soon, her parents noticed something that unsettled them. She was never truly alone. When they stood outside her door, they could hear her voice. She was speaking softly, carrying on conversations in long pauses, as if waiting for someone else to answer. They assumed it was an imaginary friend, a harmless part of childhood. But the longer it went on, the more disturbing it became. The drawings were the first sign that something was wrong. Page after page filled with the same image. A tall figure, stretched and black, with no face at all. Always standing just behind a little girl drawn in crayon, smiling with red lines that almost looked like smears. When her mother asked about the figure, the child only shrugged. She said he was the one who stood with her at night, the one who whispered secrets into her ear when everyone else was asleep. At night, the house took on a different atmosphere. The parents began to feel watched in their own rooms, though no one was there. The baby monitor sometimes crackled with static, followed by faint whispers they could not understand. There were cold patches in the hall, sharp drafts in corners of the bedroom, and an overwhelming sense that something was just out of sight. Still, the parents told themselves it was imagination, stress, coincidence, until the father heard something he could not explain. It was late, long past midnight, when he passed his daughter's room. The door was slightly open. From inside, he heard two voices. One was hers. The other was deeper, low, drawn out. The words made no sense, but the tone chilled him. He pushed the door open, only to find his daughter sitting alone on the bed, whispering into the corner of the room. She turned her head slowly toward him and said nothing at all. Her lips curved into a smile, and then she went back to staring at the empty wall. From then on, he couldn't shake the feeling that the house itself was changing. Doors creaked open at night without cause. The sound of soft footsteps echoed in the hallway, even though the child was asleep. Shadows shifted against the walls, as if cast by someone just out of view. And always, his daughter was at the center of it, awake when she shouldn't be, talking to something no one else could see. The parents set up a small camera in her bedroom. They wanted proof, or perhaps they wanted reassurance that nothing was there at all. For hours, the footage showed nothing unusual. She slept soundly, unmoving. But then, at 3:17 in the morning, she sat up. Her eyes were wide open, fixed on the far corner of the room. Slowly, she began to nod, as though listening to someone speak. Then her lips moved faintly at first. She whispered promises into the dark. Promises not to tell. Promises to listen. Promises to obey. And on the tape, just as she answered, a second voice bled through. Low, distorted, inhuman. It said only 4 words. She belongs to me. The parents watched in silence. Their daughter laughed softly in the recording, then turned her head toward the camera as though she knew it was there. Her eyes were half shut, heavy, yet there was an awareness in them that did not belong to a sleeping child. They replayed the video again and again, searching for a logical explanation, but there was none. The voice was real, the shadow in the corner was real, and their daughter was speaking to it. The days that followed grew worse. The girl began to say things she couldn't possibly know. She told her father not to take his usual route to work, and later that morning there was a fatal accident on the very street he avoided. She warned her mother not to leave the stove unattended, and the next evening the gas had been left on without anyone noticing. These warnings were not vague, they were precise, and they always came true. When asked how she knew these things, she gave the same answer every time. He told me. The parents began to lose sleep. Every night they woke to find her standing in the doorway of their bedroom, staring at them in silence. Sometimes she spoke in a voice that didn't sound like hers, low and broken, as though someone else was using her mouth to communicate. Other nights, she simply smiled. Her lips parted too wide, her eyes glazed and lifeless. The house no longer felt like theirs. It belonged to something else, and it was using her daughter as its messenger. The final night is what forced them to leave. At 3 in the morning, the child entered their bedroom again. She did not move like a child, but slow and deliberate, every step echoing on the wooden floor. She stopped at the foot of their bed, her head tilting to one side, and spoke in a whisper. He says he's coming for you next. When the parents turned on the light, her face was twisted into a smile that stretched unnaturally across her cheeks. Her eyes, wide and black in the dim light, did not blink. They felt as though she wasn't looking at them at all, but through them. The parents left that night with only a few belongings. They never returned to the house. They never let their daughter sleep alone again. In the years since, she has spoken less and less, retreating into silence. Teachers describe her as distant, absent, as if she is waiting for something to return. The family refuses to discuss what happened in detail. But when asked if they believe their daughter was imagining things, they only answer with one chilling line. Children see what adults refuse to. And so the question remains, was she speaking to shadows of her own mind, or did something answer her when no one else was listening?
The second story comes from a small rural town. A foster family had taken in a young boy, 9 years old, quiet and reserved. At first, he seemed polite, even shy, but it didn't take long for the family to realize there was something deeply unsettling about him. He never slept, not once, not in the way a child should. At bedtime, they tucked him in, turned out the lights, and went to bed themselves. Yet every night, when they woke in the small hours of the morning, he was awake. Sometimes they found him standing at the window, staring out at the empty yard for hours. Other times he sat on the edge of his bed, murmuring to himself in a language no one recognized. What was more disturbing was the way he reacted if they asked him what he was doing. He didn't blink.
He didn't answer. He simply turned his head slowly, as if listening to something else, something only he could hear. The foster mother began to notice strange noises in the house at night. Footsteps in the attic, whispers in the vents, sometimes a low scratching sound against the bedroom door. At first, she thought it was the boy wandering, but when she checked, he was always in his room, awake, waiting, watching. On several occasions, she swore she heard his voice through the baby monitor. Not unusual, except the words weren't his own. His tone would drop, low and rasping, muttering sentences she couldn't understand. She unplugged the monitor more than once, only for it to turn back on by itself, crackling with static before his voice filled the room again. He wasn't calling for help. He wasn't crying. He was conversing with something that wasn't there. The boy began filling notebooks with drawings and symbols, entire pages of circles, lines, and shapes, repeated over and over. And between them, words scrawled in jagged handwriting, words the family didn't recognize. And then phrases in English, chilling, fragmented warnings. Don't close your eyes. He walks when it's dark. Mother says the work isn't done. The family grew uneasy. Still, they tried to convince themselves that he was troubled, traumatized by his past. But one night proved there was something more. At exactly 3:33 a.m., the foster father woke to the sound of the bedroom door creaking open. The boy stood in the doorway, his head tilted downward, arms hanging lifeless at his sides. His lips moved, but no sound came out. Then slowly, a low whisper escaped. Words in a tongue the man didn't recognize, broken and guttural. The father reached for the light switch, and the boy suddenly stopped, turned his head sharply, and smiled. His eyes glimmered as though reflecting something no one else could see. The man described the feeling of being watched not by the boy, but by something standing behind him, using him as a doorway. That same night, the boy disappeared from his room. The windows were locked. The doors had not been opened, yet by morning, his bed was empty. Only his journal remained, left open on the floor. The final page was filled with one message, written over and over until the words dug into the paper. Mother says I can rest now. He was never found. Search parties combed the area, police reports filed, missing persons alerts spread through the community. Nothing. No trace of him was ever discovered. The family moved away, never speaking publicly about what had happened. But locals in that town still tell the story. They claim that in the dead of night, if you leave a baby monitor on in an empty room, you can still hear a boy's voice whispering through the static. Some swear he repeats the same warning, over and over. Don't close your eyes. And so the question remains, was he truly a child who never slept, or something else that refused to let him rest?
The final story takes us deep into the heart of a forest that locals avoid after dark, a place where silence lingers heavy in the trees, where the air feels colder than it should, and where stories of two children, twin siblings who vanished decades ago, are still whispered in hushed tones. They were last seen walking into the woods one late afternoon, hand in hand, smiling, as though they were following someone. Neither child ever came back. Search teams scoured the forest for weeks. Dogs picked up trails that ended abruptly in clearings with no footprints leading out. Clothes and toys were never recovered. No bodies were ever found. The official explanation was simple. The twins wandered too far, became lost, and succumbed to the wilderness. But those who know the area say otherwise. They insist the forest kept them, and that, in a way, it still does. Over the years, hikers have reported chilling encounters. Some describe hearing children laughing deep among the trees, though no children were anywhere nearby. Others recall seeing two small figures standing at the tree line, watching silently, their hands clasped together. When called out to, the children turned and disappeared, not into the distance, but into the air itself, vanishing as though swallowed by the woods. One story came from a group of campers who set up tents near the old trail where the twins were last seen. At night, they were awoken by the sound of crying, childlike, soft at first, then rising into loud sobs. They searched with flashlights, but nothing was there. When they returned to their tents, they found tiny handprints pressed into the damp fabric, circling each tent completely as though someone or something had been walking around them in the dark. The handprints were small, too small to belong to anyone but a child. Police records contain a handful of disturbing witness statements. A hunter once claimed he saw the twins just before dawn. They stood in a clearing, pale, barefoot, their faces blank but their eyes unblinking. They motioned for him to come closer. Against his better judgment, he stepped forward, and suddenly everything went black. Hours later, he woke lying on the forest floor, his rifle gone, his watch broken, his memory fractured. He stumbled back to town in shock, insisting he had lost only minutes, but when he checked the clock in town, 6 hours had passed. Others have not been as fortunate. A hiker was last heard on a frantic phone call to emergency services. His words were fragmented, terrified. He said he could hear children laughing in the woods, that they were calling his name, begging him to play. The final words the operator heard before the line went silent were chilling. "They're right behind me." He was never found. His belongings were discovered in a clearing, his backpack torn open, his shoes placed neatly side by side, as if set down by small hands. The legend of the twins has only grown darker with time. Some say they were not lost children at all, but lures, bait for something far older, a presence that lives in the woods, using their forms to call wanderers deeper and deeper until they never come back. Others believe the twins themselves became something inhuman the day they vanished, that they are still children, but children who no longer belong to this world. Whatever the truth may be, those who have heard their laughter agree on one thing. Once you hear it, it follows you. Even after you've left the forest, it stays with you. Soft at first, then louder, until the day you answer. The last sighting came from a driver who claimed to see them on the edge of the road at night. Two small figures standing side by side, holding hands. When he slowed down to look, their heads turned toward him in perfect unison. Their mouths opened, but no sound came out. Just a wide, hollow grin on both faces. He drove on, refusing to look back. And when he reached home, muddy, child-sized footprints led up to his porch.
No one knows what really happened to the twins from the woods, but those who live nearby keep their distance. They say the forest has claimed too many already. And if you're walking alone one night and you hear children calling for help, remember this: not every child that calls your name is meant to be saved. 3 stories, 3 children, each more disturbing than the last. A girl who spoke to shadows that answered her back. A boy who never slept and vanished with a final message no one could explain. And twins who disappeared into the forest, but may still be calling to anyone willing to listen. What connects them is not innocence, but the terrifying reminder that children, the very symbols of purity, can also be the perfect vessels for something we cannot understand. Perhaps these are only legends. Perhaps they are the fragments of grief and imagination. Or perhaps they are warnings, proof that sometimes the faces we trust most are the ones we should fear. But now, the question is yours. Which story unsettled you the most? Was it the shadows whispering in the dark, the boy who warned you not to close your eyes, or the twins waiting in the woods? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. We want to hear what you believe. If you've had an encounter, a story from your own childhood, or something a child in your life once said that still haunts you, share it. Because the scariest stories are not the ones we tell, but the ones that actually happened. If this story left you uneasy, don't stop here. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. And prepare yourself, because in our next video, we'll explore the chilling accounts of children who claim to live another life before they were born. Memories of death that cannot be explained. Until then, don't look too closely at the shadows. You may not like what's staring back.